So last week I was talking about Rings of Power's depiction of Numenor and the historical things that inspired it, but also many of the issues they had with trying to execute this. And I mentioned that episode that Peter Jackson's take on Numenor and the Realms of Exile also took some liberties. So let's talk about that, shall we? My name is Peter Cap. I am the author of the God Shard series, and welcome to another episode of Peter's No Cap History, the show where I combine my loves of history and fantasy to provide potential points of inspiration for aspiring fantasy artists, writers, and world builders. I'm also going to use this episode as an opportunity to make a couple clarifications with some of the stuff about Rings of Power, especially with the video on representation. There was a couple things I kind of didn't make clear. But we're going to be talking about the Jackson film stuff first. So, much like how I don't like Rings of Power, I love the Jackson films. I grew up on them, so there's going to be some biases there. Like, I remember watching Two Towers when I was 8. Probably too young to be watching that, but there we go. Like, those movies had a major impact on me as a creative. I recognize that the Jackson films changed a lot of things. There's emphasis more on action in places, although I personally dispute that, because the books had a lot more battle scenes than even appeared in the films. But I sort of get what people are talking about that. There was a good amount of characters scrapped, scenes played out differently. Some characterizations were noticeably different from their book counterparts, or certain things were cut out that kind of changed the impression of certain characters. And of course, there's also the visuals. Now, of course, the mileage varies. Today we're going to be talking about the Numenorians and more specifically Gondor. They're the descendants of the Numenorians, basically. This is going to be in two brief categories. We're going to talk about the Numenorians as seen in the Fellowship of the Ring, and Gondor as we see in Return of the King. The Numenorians themselves, this is probably the closest thing to a book-accurate Gondor as well. We have a lot of chainmail, wing helms, and surcoats. This is pretty consistent with what Tolkien envisioned, I believe. Also, most of these guys don't have facial hair, and this is a detail that both the Jackson films and Rings of Power both technically got wrong. The Numenorians were not supposed to have facial hair because it was part of how they were sort of a mix of men and elves don't have facial hair. Círdan the shipwright notwithstanding. So technically this is one detail that both things got wrong. But some of these background shots seem to be more book accurate. And again, Numenor was definitely supposed to be European-esque. If you like, Tolkien's major influences were Germanic and Norse stuff. Even if it's not spelled out, that was what the influence was. In the book version of Isildur's death, there's a lot of description of shield walls and warriors in such a manner that reminds me more of Germanic myths than anything regarding the ancient world. Even with certain details like this being changed, this is still pretty spot on depiction of Numenor. Now let's talk about Gondor. And this is where there's going to be a lot of liberties taken. Because there is actually a low-key Italian Renaissance vibe to Peter Jackson's version of Gondor. There's a lot of stone ruins and stuff. Yeah, it's very Byzantine. If you saw my other video, I was definitely a deliberate choice. Despite what I was just saying, the subtle geopolitical allegories of Arnor and Gondor being similar to the Western and Eastern Roman empires. There's very subtle Italian stuff going on here. I mean, the plate armor is just more generic plate armor. It's not really based on Italian stuff. But the archetypical Gondor helm reminds me of a barbute, which was a type of helmet used extensively in Italian armies during the Middle Ages and Renaissance. These are almost unilaterally barbutes. There's still a lot of imagery of Gondor, there's trees, there's wings. As a result, even if it looks a bit different, it still feels like Gondor. It's almost like Gondor, just with a different civilization as the influence. But this is still nothing like the books. This is not reflective of the books at all. Sadly. Tolkien's Legendarium was clearly supposed to be based more on early high medieval, which is centuries earlier than this Renaissance stuff would be. Critical detail though is there's a 3,000 year gap between Numenor here and Gondor here. In my opinion, this is actually an addition that makes logical sense that the Jackson films did, because technology is not stagnant like this. I feel this kind of works as Gondor being a slightly more modern but not quite descendants of Numenor. I feel this suits it rather well. If you're a purist, which is understandable, I can see why you would take issue with this, but I personally kind of like it because it works on its own merits. Even putting that aside, the Jackson films aren't perfect. I feel I need to mark this shot here. How on earth was this arrow able to penetrate the breastplate? I know this is basically a composite bow, but that's a bit reaching, guys. Aside from that oddity, this is clearly real armor. It looks like armor and has that certain sheen that real armor has. the sound design follows through with this. It's real armor, right? You know what I mean? The quality is showing there on screen. And we see this in the battle scenes. It's not just in the scenes where there's no fighting. We see this armor in battle scenes. And this is something that Rings of Power just doesn't do. And to segue about something regarding Rings of Power, a couple things I want to clarify. I realized that the video where I was criticizing the one Asian guy kind of gave the wrong impression that it was just that shot, and literally that shot, that got me so upset. That was just the poster child, the representative of the entire issue with Rings of Power's Numenor. Like, there are distracting shots like this all over the place. It is very annoying and immersion breaking. That was just like the poster child. Regarding the Jackson films Gondor again, they were consistent with the Byzantine Italian vibes. It fully commits to this. And this is something that Rings of Power, between the bad representation and the fact that it's like a Frankenstein's mess of 2 or 3 different cultures, doesn't achieve. If Rings of Power's Numenor properly committed to one of these civilizations that they were taking influence from, maybe incorporate more Numenorian imagery in there, like trees. I mean, I get why it does a lot of sun imagery, but winged helms and tree imagery should have been more prevalent in this as well, regardless of the ancient civilization they were taking reference from. If they had just properly committed fully to that look, and remember, this is supposed to be taking place centuries before, like what we see in the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring. The beginning of Fellowship of the Ring, again the movie version, is going to be the finale of Rings of Power. Timeline issues aside, Rings of Power is depicting stuff that's way earlier than this. So I can see where there could be a progression here. I don't think they're going to do it. On paper, it makes sense that it looks different. And I would be more lenient with the liberties taken if they had fully committed to it, but they didn't. Because good quality storytelling and lore accuracy was like number 3 or 4 on their priority list, and it shows. It's interesting to see how the shows and the movies, they took reference on ancient civilizations and other civilizations just in different ways. It definitely isn't interesting being the contrast. That's basically the gist with this. I know there's been a lot of Lord of the Rings themed videos lately, but I'm a big fan of Lord of the Rings. It was a major influence on my own fantasy series. I've been meaning to talk about Lord of the Rings stuff more, and this is not the end of that. I have some ideas for videos. I have more stuff that I want to talk about here, but we'll save those for another day. For now, though, I will see you guys later.